Well, welcome to the 700 Club. We take the lead. What happens if the inmates take over the asylum? Well, it seems to be happening in our nation's capital. Just imagine renaming the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial, maybe tearing them down. That's what a task force in Washington, D.C. is recommending for dozens of monuments and schools and parks and buildings in our nation's capital. But the Secretary of the Interior says, not on my watch. Who else is raising the alarm? Here's John Jessup.
That's right. A committee formed by D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is calling for action against historical monuments they say represents a history of racism and oppression. Their initial report included the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial, which are on federal properties. Among the dozens of other historical figures are President James Monroe and Andrew Jackson, as well as Benjamin Franklin and national anthem composer Francis Scott Key. Mayor Bowser said the commission's task is to identify statues and memorials that are, quote, inconsistent with D.C. values. The criteria included, did the historical figures participate in slavery, support oppression, support a supremacist agenda or systemic racism, or violate current D.C. human rights laws? Pushback came quickly. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany called the mayor radically liberal and accused her of repeating the same left-wing narrative used to incite dangerous riots and destroy our heritage. Senator Tom Cotton tweeted video of Black Lives Matter protesters harassing diners at a D.C. restaurant, calling on the mayor to refocus on protecting citizens, not removing monuments. In another tweet, Senator Cotton pointed out that the monuments are on federal property and the district cannot touch them. Interior Secretary David Bernhardt retweeted the mayor's announcement with the message that Pat just said, not on my watch, never going to happen. Following the outcry, a Bowser spokesperson says the mayor asked the commission to clarify and refine their recommendations to focus on local D.C. She also pointed out the group's focus, Pat, is about, quote, contextualizing, not removing monuments and memorials.
Well, if you're going to remove them, you have to change the name of the capital. And just like, you know, Columbus was a dedicated Christian, and yet they've taken his name down in statues of you know, in Columbus, Ohio, and other cities. I mean, it's just a shame. But this is the way the left will take control. This is the socialist Nazi agenda. It's been going on for centuries. And the first thing they do is attack the leaders of the nation, take away the country's heritage. And if you haven't got any heritage, then what are you going to fight for if a war is called? Why would your young men and women go to war if indeed the nation isn't worth saving? And if America is a historically racist nation, then why do we want to preserve it? And then we lose the freedoms, and that's exactly the agenda of the left. But don't be taken in by it. It's being promulgated, and this 1619 initiative is being taught in our schools. This monumental evil. And the head of it said, this isn't history. We acknowledge it's not history, but we want them to control the narrative. Well, I don't want them to control the narrative. But what else is happening? America's colleges are turning so far to the left. John?
Pat, yeah, the question some critics are asking is, are America's college campuses turning into training camps for radicals? Some of them say students are being indoctrinated in a left-wing ideology that's now spilling into our streets. Dale Hurd reports.
If these campus protesters look like these street rioters, there's a good reason. College campuses were the ideological breeding ground for this violence, teaching students to hate America and demand revolution. Many colleges and universities have become very successful training camps for radicals, the kind of radicals who are burning American cities and fighting the police. Portland State philosophy professor Peter Boghossian says college campuses are, without question, the source of the woke movement behind the riots in American cities.
100% of it. Absolutely, categorically, and unequivocally, the universities are cranking out utter madness.
College professors have been among those arrested in the rioting. Professor Aaron Thompson at the City University of New York tweeted this advice to rioters pulling down statues. Use chain instead of rope, and it'll go faster.
I've actually been there in the midst of many of these protest riots. I've seen it up close and personal, and many of the rioters are indistinguishable from the people you see on campus.
Cabot Phillips is editor-in-chief at Campus Reform.
Because there have been so few consequences when they do go out onto these campuses and riot and protest, they've been able to test out what works. They've been able to see how they can create the most destruction, get the most outrage, and then carry that out into cities around the country.
The radical movement that used to be confined to some academic departments now dominates whole campuses. Cal Riverside professor Reza Aslan says all Trump backers are white nationalist terror supporters who must be eradicated from society. University of California, Santa Barbara religion professor Timothy Snedeker tweeted that if he had a time machine, he would go back and assassinate Jesus.
It's not just the ruling ideology, it's the dominant moral orthodoxy in virtually every campus that's now spilled out into, it's everything. It's tech, it's media, it's CNN, it's completely woke.
We never thought the craziness, the absolute insanity that we saw on campus would amount to anything. And what we didn't realize is that the campus moved into the culture.
Cornell law professor William Jacobson has been censured by his dean and formally denounced by 21 Cornell faculty members for speaking out against the rioting and Black Lives Matter. But the most tragic recent case of campus persecution of conservatives is UNC Wilmington criminology professor Mike Adams. A Christian, he was a guest on the 700 Club. Hounded by the left for years, Adams killed himself last month. Bogosian says woke ideology on college campuses is now a civilizational threat, and he thinks it may be too late to save the university system.
I used to think 3-4 years ago that if we just defunded certain departments, we could stave this off a little bit. We're well beyond that now. Now I think that the whole system it has to be bulldozed.
American taxpayers have subsidized a university system that teaches that the U.S. government is fundamentally evil and must be torn down. And that is exactly what rioters are trying to do. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale, for that report. Pat, back to you.
I happen to be the chancellor of a university which is standing against this stuff and training Christian leaders to change the world. But you realize, ladies and gentlemen, like it or not, these students are the leaders of tomorrow. The group of, 20 years ago brought forth Bill Clinton and others. I mean, that's where they come from. They come out of these colleges. And they're trained, and there's an indoctrination of the left. And the trouble is there's no academic freedom anymore. I mean, academic freedom is long since gone. It has been supplanted by what's called political correctness, and now political correctness has been supplanted by a radical Marxist ideology. But this is how to destroy a nation. You destroy the heroes, then you destroy the ideology that has made the nation great, and then you take down their leaders, and then you teach the youth to riot. That's what Hitler did. He had Hitler Youth. I mean, it's classic Marxist technology to destroy a nation. And we're the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and we're the hope of freedom. And if this country goes, there's no other major power in the world where people can resort to for help. We're the only one, and America is standing in the gap against anarchy and chaos. And to think that the university system, which is being subsidized by taxpayer dollars, is fomenting this stuff is just sickening. I'm just astounded, but we're doing what we can do, and I think Christians all around should do what they can do. But you need to ask, what are these students being taught? And if they're being taught to become communists, then you should take your students out and you should insist that tax dollars not go into those schools. And if they go bankrupt, tough luck. John?
Pat, President Trump labeled the violence in Kenosha domestic terrorism during his visit to the battleground state of Wisconsin after last week's destructive protests. A backdrop of burned out buildings greeting the president as he toured Kenosha over the objections of some state and local leaders. The president defended the police and pledged $42 million in federal resources to help law enforcement, as well as funds to help small businesses rebuild. This as the Department of Justice is looking into who may be funding the destructive riots in cities across the country. DHS Acting Secretary Chad Wolf says people are being flown from city to city to take part in the violence.
We had about 175 arrests in Kenosha. Almost 100 of them were from out of state. So we know they're moving around. We've seen them in D.C., in Sacramento, and elsewhere. They're organized. We've seen similar tactics being used from Portland and other cities across the country as well.
And speaking of Portland, that city's mayor announced he's moving after protesters set fires and broke windows at the condominium building where he lives. Well, some good news to report here. New COVID-19 cases are at their lowest level in more than 2 months. Johns Hopkins University reports new infections dropped to less than 34,000 nationwide Monday, the fewest since June 22nd. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control is taking an unusual step to further limit the spread by temporarily halting evictions of people earning less than $99,000 a year. The administration says unilateral action is necessary since Congress provided no additional relief, and it argues the CDC has the authority to halt evictions under a federal law, allowing it to declare emergency measures to contain disease. Well, while millions have stayed at home to avoid catching the coronavirus, excessive caution has caused some to skip important medical screenings, increasing their chances of dying from another disease. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson explains.
New data shows a staggering 90% of cancer screenings were canceled this year because of COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. Hundreds of thousands of Americans missed the tests that can detect cancers of the colon, breast, cervix, and more, often before the patient even has any symptoms. Over time, cancer grows and can spread throughout the body. That's why early detection and treatment improves the patient's chance of survival. Missed or delayed screenings could prove catastrophic.
That ends up delaying their opportunity, if they are going to be diagnosed with cancer, to have the benefits of that early detection. And so my sense is that there will be more severe cancer diagnoses.
Now that many COVID restrictions are easing and patients can get the screenings and other checkups, ongoing fear is a problem. Some worry about catching the virus at the doctor's office or hospital, although healthcare facilities take steps to minimize that risk by requiring masks, clean hands, fewer people in waiting rooms, and more.
I would love to be able to see churches really stepping up to the plate, encouraging people to be able to go and get their regular cancer screening done. We needed to be able to have folks that were walking with them through this.
Karen Tripp leads a nationwide ministry of church volunteers trained to help cancer patients draw closer to Christ. She expects a spike in the months to come.
There's going to be a lot of people that we know in our communities that are going to be coping with cancer that are going to need to see how Christ can help them through that. When we look at the studies, there's no question that the impact of faith on a person's physical health is enormous.
Turns out it's not just cancer screenings. A new survey shows nearly half of all Americans report they or a family member skipped or delayed other medical and dental care because of the pandemic. And as a result, 1 in 10 of them say that person's condition worsened. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thanks, Lori. Pat, it is a delicate balance that some are trying to strike, but an important reminder there by Lori to go to your medical screenings.
No question about it. I mean, you can ward off many of these things, and if somebody's got cancer, get rid of it. I mean, don't deal with it, just say, well, I'll suffer through and wait. No, you don't wait on that.